Welcome to Founding Chronicles. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a story from America's past. Today, we bring you a haunting tale from 1853 Tennessee. The story of Louisa, the enslaved seamstress who turned her needle into a weapon of secret revenge. Let's step back in time and uncover the chilling events that unfolded in the big Whitfield house. The sun had barely risen over the rolling hills of Tennessee, yet the air in the big white plantation house was already thick with the scent of cooked bacon, smoke from the hearth, and the faint sweetness of rose bushes that lined the veranda. Inside, the household bustled with the quiet efficiency that only wealth could command. The owners of the house, the Whitfields, had long prided themselves on their order and appearances. But beneath the polished floors and the gleaming silver, a world of pain and quiet suffering thrived in shadows. Louisa, a young woman in her early 20s, moved silently among the rooms, her hands skilled and quick. She was enslaved, bound not just by chains, but by a lifetime of labor, expectation, and the constant knowledge that every misstep could mean punishment or worse. Her hands were roughened from sewing, from scrubbing, from endless work that never truly ended. She had been born into this life, her earliest memories a blur of whipping posts, shouted orders, and the small fleeting moments of tenderness that came from other enslaved women who shared her fate. Louisa had learned to keep her head low, to smile when commanded, and to hold the searing anger and pain close to her chest, because in this world, anger could be a death sentence. And yet, beneath her quiet obedience, a fire had begun to grow, a fire that no whip, no harsh word, no injustice could extinguish. It had started with the small humiliations, the way Miss Clara Whitfield would criticize her work, the way the children tossed crumbs of food at her feet like an afterthought, the way Master Henry Whitfield sometimes leaned close and whispered commands that made her skin crawl. Every insult, every injury, every stolen bit of her dignity added fuel to that quiet fire. Louisa had watched as her mother, her sisters, her friends all succumbed to this endless cycle of cruelty, and she had vowed in the secret chambers of her heart that she would find a way to reclaim some sense of power, even if it was only a fleeting taste. The opportunity came quietly, almost by accident, as Louisa worked one afternoon in the sewing room. The Whitfields prided themselves on their clothing, and she had become their trusted seamstress. She knew the cuts, the hems, the delicate patterns that Miss Clara adored. Every stitch she sewed was scrutinized, and every mistake punished. But that day, as she pressed the iron over a soft white blouse, she realized that her skill could become something more than a tool for survival. It could become an instrument of justice. Her mind raced as she considered the subtle poisons she had overheard about in hushed whispers from other enslaved workers and from the herbalists in the nearby woods. Nature, it seemed, could lend her a hand if she knew where to look. Louisa's first thoughts were cautious. Could she really act? Could she, in the quiet corners of her daily labor, turn her needle and thread into a weapon against the very people who controlled her life? And yet, the memories of her mother's sorrow, of the children crying quietly at night because they had been beaten for minor offenses, pushed her forward. She began to study the plants that grew along the edges of the fields, the leaves and berries that elders whispered about in the evening, speaking of their strange, sometimes deadly powers. Night after night, Louisa read the lines of nature with the same precision she read the hems of Miss Clara's dresses, learning which herbs could poison, which could sicken, which could bring pain without immediate suspicion. She kept this knowledge hidden beneath the floorboards of her small quarters, carefully wrapped in scraps of cloth. Her heart pounded as she touched the leaves and powders, feeling the cold thrill of potential power against the family who had stolen everything from her. Every day, as she carried out her tasks polishing silver, Laying tables, mending clothing, she rehearsed the plan in her mind. Each fold of fabric, each pressed seam, became a part of her strategy. She imagined the shock on the faces of the Whitfields when the first effects of her secret labor began to appear. It was not joy she sought. She would not celebrate their suffering, but justice, a reclaiming of some dignity that had been systematically denied. Louisa's exterior remained flawless. She smiled when Miss Clara entered the room, laughed softly when Master Henry asked about the linens, and even hummed the gentle tunes of the South as she worked. No one suspected the quiet storm brewing within her, but the nights were long, filled with the restless pacing of a mind consumed by thoughts of vengeance. In the small hours, she would touch the carefully hidden poisons, feeling their texture and weight, imagining how they would integrate seamlessly into the folds of dresses, shirts, and collars. Every garment became a silent accomplice, carrying with it the power to strike back at those who had never known mercy. And so, with painstaking care, Louisa began her work in earnest. The first dress was carefully selected, a fine muslin gown that Miss Clara would wear to dinner, inspected and prized above all other garments. Louisa washed it in clear water, folded it neatly, and then, with a trembling hand, applied the minute amount of poison she had prepared. She could barely breathe, could barely watch as she completed the act that might forever alter her fate. But the moment she finished, a strange sense of calm washed over her. This was more than survival. This was the first spark of autonomy, the first whisper of retribution, hidden beneath the folds of fabric dot as she laid the dress aside to dry. Louisa's mind wandered back to her childhood, to the sweet moments stolen from her by chains. She thought of the laughter that had once been hers to share, the songs sung softly in the fields as families worked together, the stolen moments of hope that had kept her going through endless days of labor. And now, through the quiet needlework that she had mastered under so much duress, she had found a voice for her anger. It was a voice that would speak in silence, that would strike without warning, and that would, for the first time, put the balance, however slightly, in her favor. Even as the sun set and the shadows lengthened across the plantation, Louisa worked, pressing seams, stitching hems, folding collars, and adding her deadly secret. Outside, the cicadas sang their evening chorus, and the wind stirred the long grasses of the fields. Inside, the Whitfields remained oblivious, moving through their routines, unaware that each carefully chosen garment now carried a piece of Louisa's quiet rebellion. In those small moments, as she labored in silence, she felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She knew the stakes, knew that discovery could mean death, but she also knew that in these small acts, she was reclaiming something fundamental: her power, her agency, her humanity in a world that had long denied her all three. And so the stage was set. The garments hung neatly, the poison carefully concealed, and Louisa's resolve hardened. The household continued its daily rhythm, blissfully ignorant of the quiet storm that had taken root in the hands of the young woman they had always considered invisible. And in those stolen, tense moments, as she pressed her final stitches under the dim glow of the lamp, Louisa allowed herself a single private thought. Justice, when delivered quietly, could be far more devastating than the loudest cry. The next morning, the Whitfield household stirred with its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet peril lying within their own wardrobes. Louisa moved about the house with her usual grace, carrying fresh linens and tending to the breakfast table, while hiding the pounding of her heart beneath calm breaths. Miss Clara, radiant in her carefully curated gown, selected the dress Louisa had prepared the previous day, smoothing it over her shoulders without a second thought. To everyone else, it was simply a beautiful garment, perfectly sewn. But beneath the soft muslin and delicate lace, it carried a hidden secret that would soon ripple through the house like a silent, invisible current. Louisa watched from the shadows. As the family carried on, her mind teetering between hope and dread. She had always known that life in the big house was built on appearances, polished floors, sparkling silver, and the illusion of control. Yet she had also learned the fragility beneath those appearances. One misstep, one mistake, and the facade could crumble. Her careful hands had set the stage for what she hoped would be justice, not vengeance for vengeance's sake, but a correction of the balance that had been violently tipped against her and her people. As the day wore on, she attended to her usual chores, sweeping, scrubbing, mending. Every interaction with the Whitfields was tinged with a quiet tension she alone could feel. When Master Henry passed by, he nodded absent-mindedly, expecting obedience and nothing more. Louisa smiled politely, keeping her gaze downcast, yet her mind wandered to the small, folded pieces of cloth hidden beneath her bed. Each one contained a carefully measured amount of poison, ready to do what her words and fists could not. It began subtly. Miss Clara complained of a strange fatigue during the midday meal, her color pale against the crisp white tablecloth. Master Henry grunted about a mild nausea that he blamed on the heavy breakfast, while the children, too young to understand, whined and clutched their stomachs. At first, the symptoms seemed minor, almost imperceptible, but Louisa knew better. She recognized the pattern, the slow, creeping effects of the substances she had carefully integrated into the fabrics. Her heart ached with a strange combination of fear and grim satisfaction. This was no sudden attack. It was a whisper of justice, precise and calculated. The day stretched into evening, and the household grew restless. Miss Clara retired to her chamber, claiming she needed to rest, while Master Henry muttered under his breath about some mysterious illness creeping through the house. Louisa continued her work quietly, folding and sewing, her hands trembling slightly with the weight of what she had set in motion. She had not anticipated delight in seeing the family falter, only the grim satisfaction of balance restored. Yet she could not deny the shiver of anticipation that ran down her spine. The house, so rigidly ordered and proud, was beginning to bend under the quiet influence of her labor. By nightfall, whispers spread among the servants, the enslaved workers who often shared tailies in the flickering light of candle flames. Some spoke of sickness, some of fainting, but none could trace the source. Louisa listened quietly, careful not to betray the secret she carried. Each whispered tale of unease in the big house was a small victory, a testament to the power she had claimed for herself, if only temporarily. The poison had been her shield and her voice, allowing her to speak in a language that her masters could not recognize until it was too late. Despite the success of her first act, Louisa felt the weight of what she had done. She remembered the nights she had spent in the quarters, the cold floors beneath her, the quiet sobs of her friends, the stolen moments of tenderness and hope. She had learned to temper her anger with patience, and now patience had led her to a dangerous but necessary path. She knew that her actions, if discovered, could bring swift and brutal punishment. Yet the thought of finally having agency, however precarious, gave her the courage to continue. Over the next several days, the family's discomfort deepened. Meals went untouched. The laughter that usually filled the halls was replaced by coughing, groans, and complaints. Louisa moved through the house like a ghost, tending to her duties with silent precision, watching and waiting as the consequences of her quiet rebellion unfolded. Each garment she had prepared seemed to hum with its hidden power, a testament to her skill and determination. Yet, even in her careful orchestration, Louisa was forced to confront the fragility of her own position. The Whitfields were cruel, capable of inflicting punishments beyond the imagination of those outside the plantation. A single discovery of her secret could end everything. She could be whipped, sold, or worse. Every day she rehearsed her story, Her innocence, her obedience, knowing that one misstep would erase all her careful planning. And yet she persisted, driven not by malice, but by a deep-seated yearning for justice in a world that had long denied her any doubt the tension within the house became almost tangible. The servants whispered among themselves, their eyes darting to Louisa, unsure if she knew something they did not, or if she was as powerless as they had always believed. Louisa, however, remained calm on the surface. She moved with the quiet assurance of someone who understood both the dangers and the power of the moment. Every stitch, every fold, every pressed seam was a deliberate act, a subtle message that control could be claimed, even under the most oppressive circumstances. By the end of the week, the Whitfields' discomfort had grown undeniable. Miss Clara's hands trembled as she tried to sew her own clothes, a task she had once taken for granted. Master Henry avoided the table for long stretches, claiming business in the nearby town, though his pale complexion betrayed him. The children, too young to grasp the situation fully, were listless, their usual mischief replaced by quiet complaints and restless sleep. A house that had once radiated order and authority now hummed with unease, a fragile tension that only Louisa fully understood. And through it all, she worked tirelessly. Each new garment offered a chance to expand the quiet rebellion, each moment of calm a brief respite before the next wave of subtle upheaval. Louisa's mind was never idle. She planned, observed, and adapted with the skill of someone who had learned to survive in the most brutal of environments. The poison was her weapon, yes, but it was also her voice, her way of asserting the humanity that the Whitfields had tried to strip from her in the quiet of the night. As the household settled into uneasy rest, Louisa allowed herself a single moment of reflection. She thought of her mother, of the women who had taught her the ways of herbs and survival, of the countless lives lost to the cruelty of those who claimed ownership over them. And she understood, with a clarity that brought tears to her eyes, that her actions were part of a larger story, a story of resistance, of quiet defiance, of the small but powerful ways in which the enslaved had reclaimed agency in a world designed to deny them all dignity. The poison had begun its work, but Louisa knew that this was only the beginning. Each day would bring new challenges, new risks, new moments in which her life could be destroyed in an instant. And yet, with every stitch, every carefully hidden dose, she felt a small surge of freedom, a reclaiming of the self that had been denied to her since birth. The big house, with its polished floors and gleaming silver, was no longer untouchable. And in that knowledge, Louisa found a strength that nothing could take away. Days passed, and the unease in the Whitfield household grew into something heavier, something that could not be ignored. Miss Clara could no longer hide the dark circles under her eyes, her delicate hands shaking as she tried to fasten buttons or straighten hems. Master Henry grew irritable and distant, snapping at the servants for minor errors that would have gone unnoticed before. Even the children, once full of laughter and energy, lay listless in their beds, murmuring complaints of headaches and dizziness that only deepened the sense of fear and confusion in the house. Louisa moved among them with her usual calm exterior, but inside, her heart thudded with a strange mixture of triumph and terror. She had set these events into motion, and now the consequences were rippling through the family like an unstoppable tide. Yet, Louisa's victory was not without its complications. Each day demanded careful calculation, precise timing, and endless vigilance. One wrong move, a misplaced stitch, a careless glance could unravel everything she had worked so hard to achieve. She began to notice subtle changes in the servants' behavior. Whispers followed her as she moved from room to room, questions spoken in hushed tones, eyes darting nervously as if sensing that something monumental was unfolding. Louisa could not reveal her secret. To do so would mean instant punishment. perhaps death. And so she continued, hiding her triumph beneath a mask of obedience, the weight of her knowledge pressing down on her chest like a stone. Her nights were filled with restless thoughts, the memories of her mother's laughter and her friends, tears mingling with the image of the Whitfields, pale and vulnerable in their own home. The poison she had so carefully prepared was her instrument of power, yet it demanded constant attention. She moved from room to room, adjusting folds and clothing, ensuring that each hidden dose would reach its intended target. There was no joy. In this work, only a cold, steady resolve, a quiet determination to see justice, done in a world that had denied her any recognition of her humanity. The household itself began to crack under the pressure. Servants whispered of strange visions and chills, of garments that seemed to carry a weight beyond mere fabric. Miss Clara began to complain of dizziness that made her sway as she walked, clutching the banister for support. Master Henry's temper flared unpredictably, and his usual pride was replaced by an almost frantic need to understand what was happening to him and his family. Louisa watched silently, her eyes tracing the movements of each individual, her mind calculating each step, each reaction, with the precision of a master strategist. Even in these tense moments, Louisa allowed herself brief flashes of reflection. She remembered the countless hours spent in the fields, the harsh punishments, the stolen meals, the whispered warnings of elders who had survived similar fates. Her resolve hardened. The poison was more than a weapon. It was a message, a statement, that those who had been denied agency for generations could find ways to claim it, even if only quietly, even if only temporarily. It was her voice, her rebellion, her proof that the life imposed upon her could not extinguish her spirit. As the week wore on, the Whitfield's health continued to decline. Miss Clara spent hours lying in her bed, moaning quietly, while Master Henry paced the halls, muttering about doctors and remedies, yet unable to trace the true cause of their ailments. The children, fragile and pale, clung to one another in fear, their usual mischief replaced by a quiet vigilance that spoke to the gravity of the household's condition. Louisa moved through the house with careful steps, attending to her duties, observing the subtle changes, and taking silent satisfaction in the knowledge that her careful planning was taking effect. But even as her plan progressed, Louisa was forced to confront the harsh realities of her situation. The Whitfields were unpredictable, and their cruelty, if aroused, could be catastrophic. A single accusation, a single misinterpreted gesture, could bring her carefully orchestrated efforts to ruin. She could only watch and wait, maintaining the facade of obedience while her inner world bristled with tension. Each day was a delicate dance, a careful balance between hidden action and visible submission. In these moments, Louisa also wrestled with the moral weight of her actions. She had not set out to harm beyond what was necessary to assert justice, yet the suffering she observed was real and undeniable. Miss Clara's trembling hands, Master Henry's haunted eyes, the children's pale faces, all of it pressed on. Her conscience. She reminded herself that this was not vengeance for vengeance's sake, but a reclamation of dignity long denied. Still, the sight of their suffering forced her to confront the complexity of her own humanity, and the line between justice and cruelty blurred in ways that unsettled even her steely resolve. Louisa also had to contend with the subtle suspicions of the other enslaved workers. Some cast wary glances, noticing her quiet determination and her frequent absences from the quarters when the family was distracted. Whispers began to circulate, questions that could easily be traced back to her, if she were not careful. Louisa learned to navigate these interactions with the same precision she applied to her work in the sewing room. She smiled, nodded, and offered small, innocuous advice, all while keeping the weight of her secret close to her chest. Despite these pressures, Louisa's resolve did not falter. Each garment she prepared, Each stitch she sewed was a reaffirmation of the agency she had carved out for herself. The Whitfield suffering was not a joy to her, but a necessary step in leveling a world that had long been unbalanced. She moved through the house with quiet authority, invisible yet undeniably present, a shadow that carried power far beyond what her captors could comprehend. And then came the night when the tension in the house became almost unbearable. Master Henry, in a fit of frustration, slammed doors and demanded explanations that no one could provide. Miss Clara's fainting spells grew more frequent, and the children huddled together in fear, whispering about the strange illnesses that seemed to follow them everywhere. Louisa, standing silently in the hallway, felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The moment of reckoning was approaching, and with it the undeniable reality that her secret might be exposed at any moment. Yet even as fear pressed in from all sides, Louisa felt an undeniable sense of power. She had taken control, if only in a small and carefully measured way. The poison, hidden in the seams of the clothing, was doing what her words and gestures never could. It was a silent revolution, an assertion of her humanity in a household that had never recognized it. And in that quiet, trembling moment, Louisa understood the full weight of her actions. She was no longer just a servant, no longer just an invisible presence. She had become a force, quiet but undeniable, capable of bending the household to the truth of her existence. The tension that had gripped the Whitfield household for weeks reached its peak one humid summer afternoon. The house, once orderly and proud, now felt like a brittle shell ready to collapse. Miss Clara lay in her bed, pale and trembling, unable to lift even a spoonful of food to her lips. Master Henry, his usual composure shattered, barked orders at the servants, but even they had begun to avoid direct contact, whispering among themselves about mysterious illnesses and unexplainable weakness. The children huddled in corners, their small bodies frail and frightened, their wide eyes reflecting a fear they did not fully understand. Louisa moved through it all like a silent shadow, each careful step a testament to the balance she had wrestled back into her life. Even in the midst of this chaos, Louisa's mind was clear. She did not rejoice in the suffering of the family. She had never wished to see them crushed or broken. What she sought was recognition, a subtle reclaiming of her own agency in a world that had long denied her even the smallest measure of freedom. Yet the unfolding events demanded constant vigilance. The poisons she had integrated into the garments were precise, but human bodies were unpredictable. She observed with quiet intensity, noting each symptom, each faltering step, each whispered complaint. In these moments, she realized the full weight of her actions, how small acts, carefully hidden, could ripple outward in ways both profound and terrifying. Master Henry's frustration boiled over one afternoon. He demanded a physician from the nearby town, a stern man with a ledger and an air of authority who scrutinized the family's condition with suspicion and concern. Louisa stood nearby, her hands folded neatly in front of her, offering her services as a caretaker when requested. The doctor, puzzled by the symptoms, asked pointed questions, noting the pallor, the trembling, the nausea. He tested meals, inspected the linens, and even questioned the servants, but no cause could be found. Louisa answered with the precision of someone who had been trained to please and deflect, offering calm explanations while hiding the truth in plain sight. The physician left with a shake of his head, warning that the ailments might be nervous or unexplained, leaving the household in continued confusion and subtle terror. Throughout it all, Louisa's inner life was a tempest of emotion. She felt guilt for the children, who were innocent of the cruelty she had endured. She felt a strange sorrow for Miss Clara, whose delicate hands and gentle voice belied the harshness of her upbringing. And yet, beneath it all, there was a sense of vindication, a quiet recognition that for the first time in her life, she had exerted power over her own circumstances. Every garment she had touched, every careful stitch infused with poison, was a statement. The enslaved were not powerless. They could act, resist, and reclaim fragments of their stolen humanity. Even in the shadows of oppression, the household continued to unravel. Miss Clara's fainting spells grew more frequent, leaving her bedridden for days. Master Henry's temper, once a symbol of unassailable authority, now shifted unpredictably between anger, fear, and exhaustion. The children, too weak to play, whispered in the corners of their rooms, frightened by the invisible force that seemed to pervade every corner of the house. The servants, long aware of the power dynamics within the home, began to move cautiously, their own fear tempered by a growing respect for Louisa, whose quiet composure and unwavering attention to her duties masked the extraordinary acts she had set in motion. Louisa herself faced moments of doubt. Could she continue? Would the household eventually discover her secret? The fear of discovery was constant, pressing on her chest like a weight that threatened to crush her resolve. Yet every trembling hand, every pale face, every whispered complaint confirmed that her careful planning had worked. The balance had shifted, if only slightly, if only temporarily. The Whitfields, who had once commanded absolute control over her life, were now forced to navigate uncertainty, to confront their own vulnerability, and to recognize, even if unconsciously, that power could exist in the hands of those they considered invisible. The climax of Louisa's quiet rebellion came one evening, when Miss Clara, too weak to dress herself, begged Louisa to help her into a new gown. Louisa moved with meticulous care, her hand steady even as her heart raced. As she drew the fabric over Miss Clara's shoulders, she felt the culmination of weeks of planning, fear, and determination. The poison, carefully hidden within the folds, represented the culmination of her struggle, a tangible assertion of control, a message written not in words, but in action. Miss Clara, unaware of the danger, murmured her thanks, and Louisa offered the softest of smiles, a brief acknowledgment of the power she now held. In the aftermath, the Whitfields slowly recovered, though the house never returned to its previous sense of control. The subtle effects of Louisa's actions lingered, leaving the family wary, introspective, and more conscious of the lives of those they had enslaved. Louisa, however, had achieved something far more enduring than immediate: revenge. She had carved out a space of autonomy, a quiet victory that would remain her own, hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. She continued her work, her hands skilled, her mind alert, always aware that each act could carry consequences, yet confident in the knowledge that she had, for the first time, taken control of her destiny in a world that had long sought to deny it. As she moved through the household in the weeks that followed, Louisa reflected on the broader meaning of her actions. The struggle for agency, for recognition, for humanity, was not limited to her alone. It was the story of countless enslaved individuals who had found ways to resist, to assert themselves, and to survive in the shadow of oppression. Her story, though hidden, was part of this larger tapestry of resilience, courage, and quiet defiance. And in that reflection, Louisa found a sense of peace and recognition that, though the world remained unjust, she had reclaimed something fundamental: her power, her voice, and her humanity. The big house remained, polished and proud on the outside, but the quiet echoes of rebellion lingered in its halls. Louisa continued to sew, to serve, to survive, carrying with her the knowledge that even in the most constrained circumstances, agency could be claimed, and justice, however subtle, could be delivered. Her story, though unspoken, became a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who lived under the yoke of slavery, a reminder that courage and cunning could flourish even in the darkest corners, and that every act of resistance, no matter how small, had the power to change lives. In the end, Louisa did not shout her triumph, nor did she demand recognition. She moved silently, with grace and dignity, her legacy embedded in the folds of fabric, the subtle tremors in the household, and the quiet understanding that she had, at last, reclaimed her place in a world that had tried to erase her. Her revenge was secret, but its power was undeniable. And in that quiet reclamation, Louisa found not only justice, but the enduring truth of her own humanity, a truth that no chain, no whip, and no household could ever take away.